So with all that's been going on recently relative to the Iran war and oil, you've got a lot of people saying, and it's easy to understand why, that this will cause a jump in inflation. Not necessarily. Maybe. Let me show you the distinguishing features. The price of something going up because of features that relate uniquely to it, whether it's a good or a service, is in and of itself never inflationary. The price of oil going up by itself is not inflationary. The thing that causes inflation is central banks of the world creating new money, what most people call printing money, but there's no printing to it, creating new money at a faster rate than the growth of goods and services. If the central bank ends up doing that, the United States Federal Reserve, the Euro Bank, Bank of Japan, Bank of England, and others, if they end up getting caught up in the game, as they often do, of seeing, oh, this is a bad thing, we need to loosen up to accommodate the difficulties that the world may be encountering, then that does lead to inflation. But it's the creation of the money in excess of the growth of goods and services. So let me just take you through that a little more, and then I'm going to come back to what happens when singularly the price of a very important thing like oil goes up, what that actually does and doesn't do. But let's say the economy of the world is growing at 3%, and the central banks want inflation as they seem to want, which is a kind of a arbitrary concept, but they got their concepts. They want it 2% a year inflation. Then 3 plus 2 equals 5. And if they grow the quantity of money at 5, in the longer term, that's what they get. 3% real growth in GDP globally, if that's the correct forecast, and 2% inflation with 5% growth in the quantity of money. Now, again, I'm not going to get into what central banks should or shouldn't want inflation to be, but that's what they all seem to say they want. In that environment, you don't get a pickup in inflation if they stick to that when an important price, like oil, goes up. Now, let me take you to a different concept. When the price of something goes up a lot, it tends to want to fall into a spectrum of how much do you really need that thing? How much is it difficult to replace it with something else comparable? How easily can you sidestep the usage of it? Some things are very easy to do that with, and some things are very hard to do that with. You know that if the price of bubble gum goes up steeply for reasons unique to bubble gum, that it's easy to find lots of things you might replace bubble gum with. These replaceable things, substitutable things, tend to be what's called having a very elastic demand, meaning if the price goes up a little, you use a lot less of it. On the other end of the spectrum are things where if the price goes up a little, you use almost as much as if the price didn't go up, because you got to have that amount of that stuff, whatever it is. In this case, we're talking about oil and gasoline and other fuel-related products, because it's not easy to sidestep them. Yes, if the price goes up, you might drive a little less. Yes, if the price goes up, you might adjust your air conditioning a little bit. But the reality is, when the price of fuel goes up a lot, your consumption doesn't fall the same way it would with, let's say, if the price of bubblegum went up. Now, here's what happens in an economy. When the price of that thing, like oil, that's very important and hard to find a substitute for, goes up, and the quantity of money maintains the growth rate that existed before, as we were talking about earlier, What it does is it forces people to use less of the replaceable items. It tightens the budgets of consumers. Think about it this way. You might drive a little bit less if gas is more expensive, but you're still going to drive to work. You got to go to the grocery store, whatever it is you got to do. And so then you so-called economize on things like maybe you've been going to Starbucks every day for coffee, and you could get pretty much the exact same coffee at Dutch Brothers any day of the week at 15 to 25% less. So you do some of that. Maybe, depending on how much you drive and what the temperature conditions are in your world of reality, extreme temperature changes versus very moderate, you might find yourself being forced to move from a more expensive home to a cheaper one. None of that's good. None of that's pleasant. But it didn't end up changing GDP. It ended up rearranging GDP. The fact is, you end up with more of the stuff on a relative basis that you can't substitute out on a money base for the things that you can substitute out and use something cheaper. You sell the more expensive car you already own to buy a cheaper car. You move from a more expensive home to a cheaper home. You don't go out to restaurants if you did before and could afford to before. You instead stay home more. It just reorients the production of the goods and services. It doesn't actually change the net level of them. If in fact the central banks increase the quantity of money, then it becomes inflationary. But the central banks have to, if you will, and the phrase is often referred to as accommodate that higher essential price with an increase in the quantity of money, which they do through incenting banks to lend more. But if they don't do that, and of course you can get monetary data every month online, look up from Federal Reserve of St. Louis. But if they don't do that, you're not going to get a pickup in inflation. You're going to get people reorienting what they buy in favor of oil over other things. Thank you for listening to me. I hope you found this useful. This is rarely believed by most people. Most people just assume if the price of one thing goes up, it's inflationary. That is not true. Thank you for listening to me. I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to giving you some other video message like this again next month. Thank you. Hi, this is Ken Fisher. Subscribe to the Fisher Investment YouTube channel if you like what you've seen. Click the bell to be notified as soon as we publish new videos.